Our next author, Michael Sayman, is a Latin American app entrepreneur, product designer, and software engineer. He's best known for creating chart-topping apps as a teenager. With the launch of 4Snaps, a turn-based photo game, Michael caught the attention of Mark Zuckerberg, becoming Facebook's teen in residence, and playing a pivotal role in the creation of Instagram stories, which I'm sure many of us here have used. By 18, he was described as one of the 20 most influential Latinos in tech. And at 21, he was lured over to Google, where he became a product manager and founder in residence. Today, he splits his time between Miami and Silicon Valley, where he continues to innovate in the social media space. His book is called App Kid: How a Child of Immigrants Grabbed a Piece of the American Dream.
So I guess to kind of share a little bit about where this came from as a book and what ended up coming of my life with all of Silicon Valley kind of jumping in unexpectedly. I think when people hear about my story and they hear about the fact that I was able to kind of make it in tech at that age, they usually talk about it and distance me from the people in their lives. They talk about me as if I'm some kind of genius or some magical person that has some kind of intrinsic qualities that are unable to be attained by other people. And the reality is that I always wanted kids to know that they have nothing different from what I have in being able to achieve what I was able to do. In fact, my story seems improbable, but throughout the book, I think I've been able to outline more than anything why it is possible and why, you know, it doesn't take a genius to become successful in Silicon Valley or to make something of yourself if you have the right incentives and if, you know, despite, you know, having immigrant family or some other challenges along the way. When I decided to write this book, I think more than anything, I wanted kids to know that they weren't alone if they went through similar things like me. I also wanted parents to know that being Hispanic doesn't make you less capable to succeed in computer science. The lack of resources or economic troubles, or the fact that my parents didn't have jobs, the fact that my parents didn't understand my goals of trying to build apps when I was younger, even that they didn't believe it would work. That's really what I wanted other kids to understand, that if their parents had similar experiences with them, you know, if they see a similar situation in their families, that they aren't alone, like that they aren't alone. From the outside, it appears as if I'm one of those super genius, whatever, but the reality is, you know, it couldn't be further from it. A 25-year-old with experience as a product manager at Facebook and Google over 8 years, at the age of 13, started making iOS apps. And I joined these companies almost, you know, right out of high school when I was 17. It sounds excellent, but it's not in many ways. It wasn't always pretty. As a first-generation citizen in the US, my parents immigrated from Peru to find opportunity in the United States, despite not having college degrees. They started a small Peruvian chicken restaurant in Miami, and through long hours of work, it maintained our family of four: my mom, my dad, my sister, and myself here in the US. I went through elementary school knowing that my parents built their business on their own. And I would always see my mom working late at night, not getting much sleep. By the time my sister and I were in first and second grade, we started to ask questions a lot. For example, why were they staying up so late? And more importantly for us at the time, why did we need to do our homework? My mom would come and tell us in Spanish, you need to study because you need to go to college and you need to get a good career. She would tell me, look at me and your dad. We didn't have that opportunity. And now we're really working hard to make up for that. You want to have a happy life? You don't want to end up like us? Make sure you get a career. Make sure you study. I didn't need to hear anything else. I knew that when my sister and I would wake up at 2 a.m. wondering where our mom was, that we both knew she would be working at that small restaurant. I grew up to learn that I wasn't going to get anything in life unless I made it for myself. Um, and so, being a kid in the 21st century, I loved the internet, which sounds kind of, at this point, obvious to every kid in the internet, but I was enamored with it. I soon found a free computer game online called Club Penguin. I was obsessed with it so much that I ended up making a little blog about the game, a blog that nobody ever read or really saw, but I tried my best to give it attention throughout the internet. I decided I wanted to build a mobile app version of my blog because I wasn't getting any views on my blog and I was hoping that I could get more. I didn't want to build a killer app or any of that stuff. I just wanted views on my blog. I spent months searching the internet for how to build apps. And by the time I turned 12, I had a little prototype of my first app, a Club Penguin Cheats and Guides app, built. You see, even at the age of 12, around 2009, I never doubted that the internet had the answers for me. I grew up knowing that I could search for something and I would find it. Meanwhile, my parents didn't believe me at all. A couple of years back, they'd given me a 2006 Encarta Encyclopedia CD because they wanted me to learn on the computer. I didn't use the CD because it felt old and slow. Encarta didn't give me answers to the questions I had in my mind at that moment: how to build an app, how to make a website. And I was determined to get those answers. So, I was a stubborn kid. I always did everything I could to get what I was after, even if it was maybe a little crazy or irrational. Whenever I needed help, the person I would always look to for helping me get what I wanted wasn't my mom or my dad. It wasn't even a person. It was the internet. After I launched the app, I was shocked. It took off like wildfire. Adding up the numbers, I realized I'd sold 42 copies of my app on day one. I sold 100 copies the next day, 150 the day after, and so on. I ran over to my parents immediately when I found out because my app had hit the top 10 reference apps on the entire App Store. I was freaked out. I rushed over to my parents' bed. I woke up my dad saying in Spanish, "Papi, papi, mira, mira, mi aplicación está en el puesto número 7." I was basically saying, Dad, look, my app, it's in the number 7 spot on the App Store. He rolled over in the bed and wasn't entirely impressed. He just said, "That's nice. Now let me sleep and go to your room and play over there." I wasn't surprised or really sad. My parents didn't really understand what was going on. They didn't know what apps really were and didn't understand because there was really no way of explaining it to them. It was easy to assume that all of this was me just playing games. Well, after the first month, things got real. Apple sent me my first paycheck for the app sales that I had, containing about $5,000. My mom couldn't believe her eyes. Initially, she looked over at me and, concerned, asked, "Where did this money come from?" I had to remind her that these were the apps that I was working on, that I was trying to explain to her. Soon after she started digging into this with me, she realized with shock what I was saying was true. I honestly couldn't describe the emotion in her at that moment. Of course, she still didn't understand exactly what had happened, but I tried to explain that I submitted the blog I made to the App Store and that it was about Club Penguin and many kids wanted it, so now I was making money. I explained to her the revenue split with Apple and explained to her all of the market dynamics as well. Once my app was getting popular, many TV stations started picking up on the story that a 13-year-old kid had made a top charting app. And I started getting interviews all over the place. They came from everywhere. The biggest TV shows from Peru, where my family was from, would fly out to Miami and film me at school and follow me around to see what my life was like. I didn't really feel like I even knew what was going on. My Facebook profile exploded with messages from kids all over the world telling me how inspired they were. I couldn't respond fast enough, and it felt like a dream come true. But at the same time, the economic situation in my family couldn't have been further from the success that I was having with my apps. My parents took my sister out of the school that she was in, put her in another school to try and save money. I started paying for her tuition. I started paying for my tuition with the money that I was making from my apps. I started helping my parents by paying for the house electricity bill, as well as the internet bill, and by helping with the payroll for the employees of their small business restaurant. All of the money that I was making was going to provide for the family. I didn't think anything of it at the time because what was I going to do with $12,000 a month? I was 14. I didn't need it for anything. I had already bought myself the highest end computer I could and the best smartphone that I could. And that was it for me. I didn't really want anything else. But the pressure of paying the bills started to increase, and my grades in middle school started to go down fast. I used to have A's and B's, and at that point started to get C's and D's and my first F in a class. Meanwhile, on the successful side of my life, I spoke at my first conference in Miami and was working with an agency to do a press tour in South America through Peru and Bolivia, and was holding my own conference in Ecuador. Thousands of kids from all over the world would be visiting me at these conferences and watching me talk. There'd be hundreds of people kind of pulling at me from all angles, wanting to take a picture with me about what I'd created. I was an inspiration to them, despite not feeling like it at all on the inside. I began to realize the power I had with my story. I started getting messages every day on social media from Hispanic parents in the US telling me how they saw my story on TV and how they were trying to tell their kids about how this path is something they might be able to follow. My entire family in Peru started to congratulate me, but they didn't know the economic troubles that we had at home. Everyone had heard on the radio that the Peruvian kid that makes apps was arriving in the country. When I landed in these countries, my first stops, there were cameramen from different stations at the airport, ready, waiting to ask me questions and following me around. I couldn't believe any of this. My mom came with me on all the trips because she thought I was too young to be going alone. And eventually, these trips felt incredible. But at the same time, I felt so false. I appeared to be this pillar of success to thousands of kids all over. And meanwhile, in my family, our situation continued to get worse. One day, my mom told me, crying, that we had to leave our house, that we were being evicted. And that's when my world flipped upside down. I previously helped pay thousands of dollars for lawyers to prevent this, and I knew this was a possibility, but I never really believed it could happen to me. My family came to this country hoping to live the American dream, and here we were getting evicted from our home. Through these times, I think I began to develop a thicker skin. I stopped being so emotional and I began to look at things more carefully, maybe too carefully. I made the decision to stop doing my homework and continue to build more apps to make sure we could pay the bills. I studied the app market more, focused on the young teen demographic, continued to work all day and night on what apps I could make that could help my family stay afloat. My apps were no longer making the money that they were making before, and I was barely able to pay for the minimum that we were living on at that time. I think my stress levels were way too high. I wasn't being a kid. My childhood was over at that moment. In my school, kids only knew me as the app kid because I didn't really interact with anyone. I just spent my time working on these apps. My job was to provide for my family, and I would do everything I could to accomplish that. There were days when we didn't know if we would have enough money for some of the necessities in our house. But despite our best efforts, We also ended up losing the small restaurant that they had. So neither one of my parents had a job, and I became the sole provider for my family. At the same time, I was planning my next conference tour going to Bolivia and Peru. It was a fake smile. I had to put on a fake smile. In the public, I was the successful kid who built apps and inspired others. The responsibility I thought I carried with being an example for other children was all that I thought of whenever the cameras turned on. My brain would instantly turn off every frustration, every scream, every panic attack that my parents had every night. Seeing my parents crying in frustration, I would just shut it all off. I would put a big smile on my face and speak about the opportunities that programming gave kids and how they too could become successful in America. In one interview, I was asked about what the kids should do when they see a perfect example of success like myself, and then look at their family and see turmoil and no hope. I responded with my rehearsed answer. Determination and curiosity is key. As long as you keep moving forward, you will get it. I couldn't stop thinking about what a terrible answer I gave. I was so frustrated. At that moment, I realized I needed to tell the story of how I wasn't the perfect success. I needed to share my imperfect life. Kids needed to know, and parents, that my success story was far from ideal. I spoke about how I struggled to pay for our family's bills, and I decided to write a book about it, to write a book about how my parents had lost their jobs and how I took on helping my parents get food for the table. My story of imperfection and realism is one that I hope can tell every parent and child that the life I was living wasn't perfect happiness or millions of dollars or anything like that, but rather one of success that includes struggle, and actually struggle that for that reason would hopefully hold stronger of a message than before. The idea that the lack of resources or economic troubles or my parents coming from Peru would not make things harder for me, but rather it would be the ingredients that helped me push forward. That's what made, I believe, my life possible, what they taught me. Having been hired at Facebook when I was 17 and being 25 today, I'm hopeful that I have the opportunity to share this imperfect story now, to share what it's like to succeed in a world where everything is falling down around you. I'm hopeful to have the opportunity to tell kids who live at home now, going to school at their computers, that there's opportunity on the internet to create something yourself, regardless of how old you are or where you come from. Not everyone has to be a doctor or a lawyer. And if parents and kids can see how someone just like them got to succeed in ways that I cannot believe to this day, well, I think then we'll get one step closer to our mission of connecting the world and educating people through the internet. The story of my failure, in an effort to talk about what's wrong with my success story, is scary to tell. Am I afraid of it? Of course. I want to say that it's okay to be afraid, as long as I push myself to be bold, right? Am I afraid of talking about what I went through? Yes. Was I afraid of writing about this in the book and all the mistakes that I've made? Yes. But being bold doesn't mean that I'm not afraid. It means that I don't let that fear stop me from trying. I could be wrong about all of this, but we have to be okay with it. We have to be okay with being afraid, and we have to push ourselves to be bold, I think. So thank you.